Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. Oh, man, I've been waiting to have this conversation since the minute I saw the movie. But I wanted to see the movie more than once. I've seen it 5 times. 5 times in the first 7 days, to be exact. I love this thing so much. It's so good. And after seeing it 5 times, I really have gotten a lot out of it. I've pulled as many things as I could see and pull. I've put them in notes. I've talked about them with people. I am so ready to have this spoiler discussion. So why don't you pull up a chair, man, take a seat. We're getting ready to dive in, spoiler filled, into Us. Oh, this is the only way to have this conversation, man, to be open and free and just talk about it, because there's so much in it. I mean, if you saw my non-spoiler review, you know that there's so much in it. Somehow I was able to talk about it for like 15 minutes without really giving anything about it away, but just talk about all the technical and wonderful things that Jordan Peele did as a filmmaker. Now, if you have not seen that non-spoiler review, boom, go right there, go check it out, especially if you haven't seen the film. If you haven't seen the film and you're here for the spoiler review, you're crazy. I got like 5 pages of notes, man. We're going to crack this bad boy wide open, talk about everything. So if you haven't seen it, man, go check out the non-spoiler review first, then come on back. And I just strap in, man. We're gonna be here for a while, and I appreciate if you're hanging out for the whole thing. I will have chapter markers, so if there's specific things that you've thought about the movie or wondered about the movie or wanted to know, you'll be able to follow along via the chapter markers. Let's get this thing going. We're gonna start right at the beginning of the movie, and I love how the beginning sets up basically the entire film. After you've seen Us multiple times and you just get to the points where like you're on the 4th and 5th time and you're just looking at things in the background, and then you start to look into what those things are. There's so much here, man, that just gives so much away. Not necessarily gives so much away, but just sets the movie up correctly. Right out the gate, man, the Hands Across America versus Santa Cruz commercials. The movie opens with Addy, young Addy watching TV. It's back in the 80s, and you see, like a bad news story wraps up and the news goes to commercial. And the first commercial we see is Hands Across America. And then she sees a second commercial for Santa Cruz. And then the family goes to Santa Cruz. And I love how those 2 commercials give you the doppels and the doubles of what America is, right? Hands Across America, the concept of like 6 million people holding hands across the entire continental U.S. to raise money to help, unfortunate, poor, homeless people. Yet, when you look at America, we've got the largest poor population and homeless population like in the world for the most part. And then the second commercial is this sexy, glitzed up, glamored, sexy looking commercial for Santa Cruz, where you got lots of good looking people running around in bathing suits. They're drinking beers. They're having fun on the beach. That's what America sometimes really is, man. Really, really good at selling us on things, making things look a lot better than they are. And when the family goes to Santa Cruz, we know things aren't all glitzy and glamoury and things get real, real bad. And I just love how that dichotomy is set up, boom, right in the first 2 commercials. And it really tells you what Jordan Peele's main conversation is in this movie. That's the stuff that he's really talking about. Everything he does, whether it's symbolic or an allegory or whatever, it's talking about that conversation of how, America and people in general, right? We have 2 sides. Every coin has 2 sides. And on the American side, we have a lot of issues in this country that sometimes we do not address, yet we, go to space or do stuff like that, and it looks like, oh man, we're doing cool stuff, and you're ignoring the problems. A lot of that conversation is going on in the movie. Now, as far as what the movie is going to dive into, in that same sequence, if you start paying attention to the stuff around the television, so many clues to where the movie is going to be. There's all sorts of VHSs up on the wall, and there are 3 that you can read really, really easily. The first one is CHUD, CHUD, which stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. This movie, when you read its synopsis, you really understand where this movie is going, man. Listen to the synopsis for CHUD. Photographer George Cooper, John Hurd, is documenting the lives of subterranean homeless people, a population that has mysteriously dwindled. After receiving information from a reporter, George becomes aware of a conspiracy theory about cannibalistic monsters lurking in the sewers. He teams up with a reporter, a policeman, and a priest to fight 2 battles, one against the cannibals and the other against corrupt government officials. Boom, right there, man. In the synopsis of the movie, subterranean tunnels where homeless people live. Now granted, they're not homeless, but to the degree they are kind of homeless, they just kind of live in these subterranean tunnels. But the fact that the tethered, they kind of represent the homeless and the poor and the unfortunate. And I just love that. Boom, right there in the Chud synopsis, you see major plot points for this movie. Then one of the other movies you see is Goonies. Listen to this synopsis. Old-fashioned yarn about a band of adventurous kids who take on the might of a property developing company, which plans to destroy their home to build a country club. When the children discover an old pirate map in the attic, they follow it into an underground cavern in search of a lost treasure, but come up against plenty of dangerous obstacles along the way. Now you read that synopsis, and you go, oh my gosh, man, all the characters in Goonies are about to become homeless. And where do they end up for a large chunk of the movie? They go into the sewers and then find an underground cave. Again, group of people underground and referencing homeless people. And there's, Goonies, there's a couple Goonies things throughout the movie. Then the only other movie that you can see that really is easy to read up there is The Right Stuff. And this one took me a little while to think about because I'm not sure if there's a totally direct connection to, a historically accurate movie made about the first 15 years of NASA. Other than it's placing us in the 80s at a time where America was really revving up from a technological and a scientific perspective with all sorts of different achievements. So when you kind of look at it from that way, you can kind of go, this was an era where experiments like creating the tethered, it's plausible that that type of stuff could have been, going on, at least in this world, right? And it also gives the idea of traveling to space or going up and out of the world you're from, which is exactly what the tethered are doing in this movie. So right there, boom, within the first 2 minutes of the movie, Jordan Peele has literally visually set up almost all the concepts and things that he's going to dive into. Now, the other thing that we get to see real early on in that opening sequence is, when Addy breaks away from her dad and starts walking toward the beach, she sees a guy, presumably, homeless or something like that. He's looks kind of ratty or whatever, but he's holding a sign, and the sign says Jeremiah 11:11. Now, when you look into what the actual Bible verse of Jeremiah 11:11 is, I went to the King James Version because I think it's the creepier of the two. This also really kind of sets up what this movie is about. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape. And though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. I mean, there is, to some degree, evil being brought upon, the surface dwellers, and it is just nonstop. Outside of, the family that we're with, it seems like everybody else except for 3 helicopters are being wiped out by the tethered. So, you see Jeremiah 11 right at the very, very beginning of the movie, and you're just like, if you know what the verse is, you're like, oh my gosh, we are about to dive into a terrifyingly creepy movie, and that's exactly what we get. But since we're on Jeremiah 11:11, I want to talk about the Jeremiah 11:11 Doppel real quick, because that is one of those things that Peele throws in our face right away, and we don't really even pick up on, especially the first time we watch the movie. But the guy who holds the Jeremiah 11:11 sign is the guy being wheeled out on a stretcher with, blood coming out of his chest at the beginning of the movie when, the family's heading to the beach. Then when we're at the beach, Jason sees that creepy dude standing there with his arms out and the blood dripping off his fingers, and you don't even put it together, at all. At least I didn't put it together at all the first movie, because the first viewing, I'm just kind of sitting there letting everything soak in, and I'm not thinking so much as I am just watching. And then you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, man, he threw a Doppel who's not one of the main family's Doppels in our face right at the beginning of the movie, right at the beginning of the trailers. When you got the trailers, you just thought that it was just this family. When we learn it's the whole world has Doppels, it's kind of like, holy cow, and you really get that at Josh and Kitty's. But prior to that, you're never thinking about it. He throws it there right in the beginning of the movie. Because after you see that, the guy that's standing there, he has his jacket on that he's wearing. And you notice, when we see the line at the end and both, Tex, Josh's Doppel, steals his bathrobe, some of the tethered do take the clothing and put it on. But because he has that trench coat on, you just know he has red. You're not really thinking, oh, it's a red jumpsuit. Second time through, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the red jumpsuit. Oh my gosh, he's got the brown glove on. The blood on his hand, he killed his Doppel. And then boom, went right to where he had to stand to create the Hands Across America symbol, that the Tethered are doing based on Red's plan. And I love that that's her basis. There are things that we'll talk about in a moment that kind of tie back into, Hands Across America and why Red would know about it. And then to just exemplify, what Peele's talking about under the surface when you're talking about, creating an actual Hands Across America of Tethered. You're showing the world that it's lacked to do something, that's ignored something, that there were empty promises. To the people underground, they've been ignored, they've been forgotten, and now they're just kind of roaming around aimlessly. The story underneath the story that Peele is really talking about, how America has kind of ignored and forgotten some of the promises that they've made. So I love that that's the symbol for Red in the movie. And when you look at what the Tethered are doing, there are good people. People started, Hands Across America, had a good idea, thought it was a good concept. But without the masses backing it, it's hard to get things accomplished. And I think you kind of get all that expressed in the imagery and the story. But what is strange is that it's not really Red's plan. The thing I've been waiting and dying to talk about the most about this movie is its twist. We get to the end of this movie, and we get to a scene where, once again, Addy is being talked to by Red, and Red's kind of breaking things down, and you're like, okay, this is interesting in what she's saying, and some of the stuff that she says doesn't really connect. But then when you get to the end and they're driving home after everything's over, after Addy's killed Red, after everybody's killed themselves. Every character in the movie from the main family kills its own Doppel. Gabe kills his. Jason is responsible for killing Pluto. Zora is responsible for killing Umbre, and Addy is responsible for killing Red. And then when they're driving home, all of a sudden we see the full flashback. The very, very opening scene, which we watch, stops when Addy's eyes start to go wide before we see the Doppel. What is so clever about this twist that Peele delivers is that by giving us the trailers he gave us where we saw Addy's double grab her by the throat, when we cut to her being in the car and just super, super scared the next time we go back to that story, and then the parents go to the doctors, and they're talking about the post-traumatic stress disorder. That's just baked into your brain because even though we haven't seen it, that the Doppel does choke her. And if I was choked by my own Doppel, seeing my own Doppel would give me post-traumatic stress disorder. Being attacked by it certainly would, and you don't really pick up on what's really going on. So at the end of the movie, when we see the full flashback, after the choke, we find out Addy passes out, and Red drags her underground, chains her to a bed, and then takes her place. Dude, when it happened in the movie, I was just like, what the? Totally lost. My one buddy was like, what'd you think? I was like, I don't know what to think about this movie, because I gotta let it sink in. Everything we've watched is backwards. Who we think is Red is actually Addy, and who we think is Addy is actually Red. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, you're just like, holy cow, this is wild. But it makes a lot of things make sense. Like the Hands Across America bit. Addy sees that commercial, the t-shirt that she has underneath, that she has on at the beginning before her dad wins the Michael Jackson Thriller t-shirt, which we'll talk about in a second, is the Hands Across America tee. It's with her when she's underground. It's kind of the symbolic stuff everywhere in the movie, and it makes sense because Red would have never known what Hands Across America was, but Addy would. Mind-blowing. And what's even more mind-blowing is when you look at stuff that Jordan Peele does. He slaps us in the face, hinting at this the whole movie. Now, there's one thing before we get into the taunts that sort of is in our face right at the beginning, but we don't really get the payoff for it until the end, but it's one of the most clever things I think Peele does in the movie. The Michael Jackson Thriller shirt that Addy has on at the beginning of the movie, it just signifies a lot of 80s pop culture, right? I mean, Michael Jackson at that time was the biggest thing in the entire world in the 80s. Thriller at that time was like the biggest music video of all time. It would make sense that she would want that, and you're just kind of placing yourself culturally. But if you're thinking about it in terms of what the shirt is, it's about Thriller. Think about the Thriller music video. Michael Jackson is actually not a Doppel per se, but he has two sides. He has his human side and then that beast side. And then what's even more messed up now that we've gotten, the Leaving Neverland stuff, that it was real, true in real life. How he was a monster and something else. He was this pop icon outside of being that. So it's interesting how that story kind of has now tied into the Jordan Peele story in a way that plays for him. But the concept of Thriller, him being two things, and by the end, he's, you think you've gotten rid of, the wolf, or the monster, but at the end, his eyes change and he looks at you and he smiles. And you're like, oh man, the evil is still in there. You get Thriller at the beginning. You go to the end of the movie, one of the last shots we get of Red driving the ambulance, she kind of looks back over at Jason, smiles, and if you think about it in the sense of Thriller, that's exactly what Mike does. That smile is hinting at the fact that there is still tethered, there's still evil, there's something else in her, that not something good is coming at the end of this movie. Like, wherever we're going, something else bad is going to happen, whether it's Red forcing the tethered back down and kind of trying to help the world start over, or if it's her taking over the tethered and maybe taking over all of the planet, because as we know, the tethered, as far as we can understand, only exists in America, because that's where those subterranean tunnels are. So something bad is coming at the end of the movie, and that look and that smile, when you're not thinking about it, is just creepy looking, but when you connect it to Thriller and the way the Thriller music video ends, it gives you something. Now, that just being really, really cool. The other thing too with that is that one hand, the one-handed glove. Michael Jackson wore a one-handed glove, and then I read an interview actually where Peele talked about how the one-handed glove, multiple iconic figures. Obviously Michael, but Freddy Krueger, as far as horror characters go, wore one glove. With the claws, and if you think about the design of it is kind of Freddy-like. We see Michael Jackson in the Thriller stuff, and we know that he wears one glove. And then there's another person referenced in the movie, and I won't lie, when the joke was made, when Josh goes out to the window to look for Kitty, and he's like, oh, wait, there's something. Oh, I see something. It's OJ. You're kind of like, that's a strange kind of joke to make now. But when you know that OJ is connected to the one glove bit, when we see him try to put the one glove on, it doesn't fit, that joke now makes sense. All of that, though, kind of comes into, for me, I put together the glove stuff because of the Michael Jackson reference. But Peele taunts this twist at us the whole movie. When you go back and rewatch this, man, look at these individual things that he does. The doctor's convo. Like I said, when we go there originally, you're buying into the post-traumatic stress disorder stuff. But if you're listening to the words, man, you hear the mom go, she was gone for 15 minutes. She went away. You don't know what happened. I just want my daughter back. And then when they flash back to that scene later on, they emphasize that I just want my daughter back. Kind of hinting like it's not their daughter because it's not their daughter. The last toy that young Red is ultimately playing with, when you see her lining all the toys up in that little sandbox play thing, the last thing she puts down and we see her hand come away from is a white rabbit. These things are everywhere. The fact that young Addy doesn't speak, again, you're thinking about the post-traumatic stress disorder, but when you're thinking about it in reality, the tethered don't speak. We learn that in the movie. These are clues that he drops everywhere for us to figure this out. And at least I know I didn't get it, and I know most of the world didn't get it, because everyone's that I've talked to has kind of had the same reaction when it's like that hit. You were just like, holy cow. And then throw into that adult Addy doesn't like to talk. When she has that conversation with Kitty when they're on the beach and Kitty's just trying to do small talk, and Addy's like, I'm just not good. I'm not good at just talking. And also when Gabe is in the car, and Zora says something, and she's like, yeah, no one cares about the end of the world, hinting at the end of the world. It's actually foreshadowing that the end of the world is kind of coming. But when she says that, Gabe's like, we don't always have to be talking. And then they turn the music on. But if he was married to Red, thinking it was Addy, he would, in a marriage with two kids, he would have to know that Addy doesn't like small talk, hinting again that it's at Red, because Red doesn't really like to talk. She kind of teach herself enough just to blend in. Then there's when you're watching them like just do certain things. When they're at the dinner table, when they first get down to the beach, Red is the only one not eating fast food. Everybody else has got fast food, and you see Red sitting there eating strawberries, which kind of hints at the fact that they would have been eating natural type stuff down in those subterranean tunnels. Either raw, bloody rabbit, or I'm sure they must have had fruits and things that they must have given him down there. And also when Kitty offers her, the alcohol, she only drinks, she's like, no, I'm good, I got water. And anytime you do see her drink in the movie, that's all she is ever drinking. So those things also kind of hint to the fact that she comes from the subterranean tunnels. And these two plot points in particular, with the eating and the not talking, I think that kind of refutes one of these theories that have come out in reference to Jason. There's a theory out there that Jason was swapped when he got locked in the closet. Now, there are several things I don't like about this, but those two things in particular, the fact that like he does talk and he talks fine, he doesn't really struggle. He doesn't talk a lot per se in the movie, but I think that could be a misdirect. But it doesn't, and especially if it was only a year removed, I don't think he'd be able to speak that fluently within a year. Also, the fact that when they're at that table, he is drinking soda, eating the fast food that everybody else is eating. So I think that kind of debunks it. As well as like, if that were the case, that means now there are secret doors inside of houses. Like the amusement park, Hall of Mirrors type bit, that makes sense. Because somebody could have built that there and built it all in. But the houses, for it to be in random houses, I don't like that either. And when you really sit down and you look at this movie, and my non-spoiler talked about it being abstract. It doesn't really function like a normal movie. But when you watch it over and over, you start to realize that there is a normal movie in there. There's one story that's straight through, does all the things that a movie should do, and that's Red's story. This is Red's story. It's not Jason or Pluto's story. So I don't buy into it there. And in all honesty, the way he's acting by the end of the movie, maybe he's regressing. I think it's more that he's seen a lot of messed up stuff in the course of that day. I mean, he watched his sister kill somebody, but he's the only one that saw Red, kill anybody. He saw her when she kills the twin, and he picks up on some of that kind of grunting and like tethered type, characteristics in the way she breathes or talks or speaks and acts. And then when he's underground, yeah, he might not be seeing it, but it's possible that he could have pushed that open and watched that entire thing unfold. But he has to hear what's going on in that room because he's in the same room. And after Red kills Addy, the noises she makes there also, clue the audience into the fact that she's tethered, but might be cluing him into the fact that, hey, she's acting a lot like them. Like maybe there's something off with Mom. That when you get to the end of the movie and he pulls the mask down and kind of looks at her scared, for me, I've always said him pulling the mask down is because he is frightened. So it just confirms to me that he knows something is wrong with his mother. It's not that he knows, like, oh, I know and I know you know. He's scared in that moment because when he pulls the mask down, he's either pulling it down because he's trying to be brave, and that's kind of like his defense mechanism. So to me, I kind of don't agree with that, theory. And then there's also, this element of like, oh, but like when Red gets out of the ambulance to go try to confront Pluto, she's like reaching out to him. I think that's more to the fact that it's not her actual son, right? Like she figured out that they got swapped, but more to the fact that like this is about her and Addy. It's not about anyone else. These kids are innocent. Even when Zora kills Umbre, she gets out of the car and goes into the forest and everyone's like, Mom got out of the car. Why is she doing that? You're figuring to confirm that she's dead, but she might actually be going over there just to make sure like, hey, like these are still kids. And maybe that isn't something that she's okay with at this point in her life. So I think a lot of that plays into it more than, Jason actually being swapped. But I digress. Like as I said, and this is really about Red's story. And the other thing that I like about, the Red story, that's a nice symbolic gesture after we do watch the movie and you go back and you know everything that's going on. Her actually being tethered the whole movie is kind of cool. When Addy comes up and tells her, tether yourself to something, to the table, puts it on her arm, and then you see that image later when the flashback is fully revealed that young Addy's arm was tethered. That kind of symbolic gesture is something nice that I like that plays into their story. So look, there's a lot, right? We've gone like 20 plus minutes just talking about the very opening of the movie and the twist of the movie and what it kind of all layers in and mixes together. And that stuff is mind-blowing. And there are hints and triggers all over the place. But there is also a lot of stuff that's not about Red and the twist in particular. So what I want to do is, now that we've kind of discussed those things, the big talking points, if you will, about Us, I want to just get into some of my favorite things and scenes from this movie. And I'm going to start with Mr. Winston Dukes Gabe. I love his dad joke moments and just his dad moments throughout this whole movie. Every time he kind of breaks an awkward silence or makes a bad dad joke, one, it cuts that tension, but two, you genuinely laugh because it's so ridiculous and the timing is just so perfect and so natural. I really do think he pulls off a dad so well. And like I said, I love when he's dropping those jokes and awkward silences, like when they're having that conversation after the invasion, and, you know, Addy stops talking for a minute, and he's like, what do you want? Like, you can have my wallet, you know, you can have the car, hell, you can have the boat. And then Zora's like, Dad, nobody wants the boat. Stuff like that is just so genius in this movie, you know, because they're just such real human moments. It's natural to want to break that silence because that silence is terrifying, and I love that Winston Duke gets to be the guy that does that. I also love when they're in the car and Zora's driving and she's like, look, I have the highest kill count, and, you know, Red is like, no you don't. She's like, yeah, I killed the two twins. She's like, I just killed the second one. And Duke breaks in and he's like, yeah, so that's one, you know, you hear Jason say, you know, I killed Kitty, but Kitty's double is actually Dahlia. So, you know, so he kills Dahlia. And love when Duke goes, that's 1, 1, 1, 2. I killed myself and Josh. Like, so funny, and ultimately it ends up being 2 after they all kill themselves. I just love that moment, and it's like little things like that make you go back and go, wait, so how many people did everyone kill? Oh wait, everybody killed themselves. Like, it helps you realize some of the stuff that's in there. But my favorite Duke moment in the entire film is when they pull up right before Pluto, you know, pull up in front of the burning car, and Pluto pops up, and Red gets out of the car, and Gabe kind of does this thing that's such a dad move. Like, in a moment like this, if this was happening and it was my dad, he would have done the same thing. Red starts to get out of the car now for the second time since they've been in it. And Duke immediately just turns and goes to give her a kiss, and she looks at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, the world is coming to the end. No, I'm not going to give you a kiss. Oh, that stuff, it makes you so happy. And like I said, it breaks that tension so well. And it really kind of plays into how much of a great character performance Winston Duke gives throughout the whole movie, because it's so believable. Then there is the Tex and Dahlia, or Josh and Kitty sequence. At Josh and Kitty's house, I think it's one of the best sequences in the whole film. From a horror perspective, it is like a house of horrors, man. From the initial killing where Dahlia and Tex pop up and the twins doubles pop up and they wipe out everybody real quick, except Elizabeth Moss, who hits the ground. Which, by the way, leads to one of my favorite camera shots in the movie. Like I mentioned in my non-spoiler, Peele does a lot of things that we've seen from other movies before, but tweaks them or adds to them and makes them unique. And after, you know, Kitty gets stabbed, she ends up on the ground. She's not dead. She starts crawling, you know, towards Josh, who's already been killed. And you get this wonderful shot where the camera is low and it's right on Kitty, and as she's crawling towards the camera's kind of backing up. The creative thing that Peele does here is then to cut from that, he flips to Josh, and, you know, from Kitty the camera's going this way, but to Josh it's going this way, so the camera motion all kind of seems seamless, and pushing in on Josh, who's dead and just kind of looking at the camera, also a shot that we're very familiar with in horror films. So to bring those two together and merge them, it just looked really cool. I also love how Elizabeth Moss is bleeding profusely from her neck the entire time. I think I picked up on it in like the 4th or 5th viewing, because you could hear it. You hear the constant dripping, and you're like, what? And then you look and you watch, and it's literally pouring the whole time. And when she reaches out, it is like shoot, and you're like, where is all of it coming from? But just a little touch like that, so realistic. I absolutely love everything about that sequence. And then the other thing that goes on in the house that I absolutely love is when Dahlia is up in the room with Red, and that sequence where she she ends up cutting her face. It's one of the most terrifying stretches, I think, in the whole movie. I love the 1950s music that's playing under when that scene starts, and she's in the mirror and she's putting on the lipstick, and like I had said in my non-spoiler, it felt Joker-esque in the way she was performing. And then she hears the noise, everything stops, and she goes and runs toward Red. And what I love is if you go back to that beach conversation where her and Kitty are talking, and she's talking about, well, I did get something done. And she's like, you see, and he's like, oh my gosh, did you do something? She's like, yeah, just a little something. But not like you don't need work, you whore. Like, it's played off like it's funny, but like you can tell, like if you're really watching Elizabeth Moss's face after that interaction happens, she kind of gets kind of stern and serious. Like, yeah, I really do kind of hate that your face is perfect and I have to get work. If you're thinking about that, and now we flash back forward to there, where she runs up and she's looking at Red, and she has the scissors. She's looking at her like, oh my, like almost giving her a look like, your face is perfect, I want to murder you. But then she stops, turns, goes back to the mirror, and then she cuts herself. Well, if you're looking at her face prior to that, man, there are scars all over the place, which means anytime Liz Moss's Kitty probably had plastic surgery, her Doppel did something to her face similarly in the places that they were. So clearly she's had multiple things done. And then it's either blood spatter, from the killings, or maybe they are little scars, but they're all little dots like all over her face in locations that you would get Botox. I think everything about Dahlia's face just kind of tells you that Kitty has had more than just a little work done. And that envy toward Red exists even with Dahlia, but she stops herself and goes, no, I'm not going to do anything to you. My face isn't perfect. Let me cut it. And that smile is just so creepy. And then, you jump over to Josh, who's chasing Gabe. And I love that Gabe immediately goes for the boat. Because if you jump again back to that beach conversation that him and Josh are having about the purchase of his boat, he's like, oh, did you get everything? Life preservers, everything you need. And he's like, the flare gun. And he's like, I knew you would forget the flare gun. When Gabe leads Tex out onto the dock, it's natural that he jumps into Josh's boat, which, by the way, is Biatch. It like biatch with yacht in the middle. It's such a cleverly funny name that when you finally see it and you pick up on it, you laugh out loud. But Gabe going in, I love that he goes in because of the flare gun, and when he shoots it, the flare gun doesn't even work that well, and he has to physically take on Josh. I just love that there are, parts about that scene that bounce back and forth, even to when, Zora takes out the two twins, just in the fact that there seems to be tension between the real versions of them up on the beach. Like, we're supposed to be friends, but we don't really get along, so like we act nice but not really. So like she takes that frustration out on the Doppel twins when she kills them in the house, and there's just all this bouncing back and forth that you can do between those two scenes. I really, really love it. But there are two scenes in this movie that take the cake. And it's the first scene with Addy, and it's the last scene with Addy. The invasion sequence is so creepy. It's set up when they're just outside, and Winston Duke is like, y'all want to get crazy? We get crazy. I love that his voice drops when he talks about the police, where he's like, the police are already on their way. Like, he's trying to be tough because he's not naturally tough. But then when Addy does that, and they all take off, you're just like, nope. And right from that point on, you are tense the whole movie, unless Winston Duke is cracking jokes. But the thing I really love about that sequence is the conversation. There are two main conversations with Addy, like I said, at the beginning and at the end. And this first one, it just sets up really creepy stuff and shows you the brilliance of Lupita Nyong'o. When she reveals that voice and how she talks like this, and I know, terrifying. And then when you're listening to the whole story, man, how like there was these two little girls, and the one little girl, she had everything. She got to eat wonderful food and got great presents at Christmas, but her shadow, she had to eat rabbit raw and bloody. And at Christmas, her toys were so sharp and jagged, they would like cut her fingers. Just brilliant dialogue writing from Peele, and just creates this really terrifying imagery. And when you go back and watch the movie a second time, or a third time, or a fourth, or a fifth, if you're me, and you watch that sequence and you know that it's Addy saying it and not Red, oh my gosh, it's so much more impactful and makes that dialogue even stronger. And then she follows that with the story of how she had to marry, Abraham because he was tethered to the little girl's prince. And then the story of like how she birthed the kids, where Red had a little girl and Addy birthed a monster, and then Red had a C-section and Addy had to do all of it herself. And again, when you look at it from that context, that it was Addy having to go through this, and she's not a mindless tethered, it makes that story all the more creepy. And now you're kind of like, I'm rooting for Addy because she got screwed in this. So by the time you get to the end and she gets what happens to her, when we'll get there in a sec, you're just like, oh man, like I don't know how I'm supposed to feel, because I'm very conflicted for so many reasons, because it's Red's kid, so you don't want anything to happen to her mom, but she stole Addy's place, so you kind of feel for Addy. Really, really just clever and very, very impactful writing, man. It's the type of writing like that draws you into a story on so many different levels. It's just so smart. And then from that conversation, I love the breaking off of pairing all the Doppels together and kind of pitting them against one another. You get Zora doing exactly what she's best at, which is running. She takes off. And then her Doppel, Umbre, does what she's doing best, which is hunting. You can kind of get a sense that she must do stuff like she likes to hunt. She likes the game. And I just love that whole stretch, specifically, again, where Jordan Peele uses a classic shot you're familiar with, where they're kind of walking, parallel from each other, and Umbre drops and Zora drops to look under, and you're expecting to see that shot you're so familiar with, but instead the camera sits across and is looking at Zora and goes this way, so you see her looking, then spins to the shot that you're familiar with to kind of go both ways, and instead of coming up and boom, there's Umbre, you see the car move first. It's little things like that make all of these shots so inventive and unique, even though they might be similar to shots we've seen in the past. So I just love that whole bit, and then I love, the way it ultimately ends with the car chase, and, Zora getting to drive, and something she talked about the whole beginning of the movie plays into her beating Umbre. I just love all of that. The Gabe and Abraham stuff is fantastic. It's funny, and then when, Abraham finally does get him, I love that he ends up in a plastic bag and he kind of rips himself out. And just that whole bit, how it kind of reminds you that Gabe is uncoordinated. He's not all that, he's kind of clumsy. When he falls off the boat, he's not prepared for it. And then even when he kills Abraham, it's kind of a fortunate break for him that the engine kicks back on and kind of tears him up. So I guess you could argue that he doesn't even get 2 kills in the movie because the boat gets 1. And then the Jason and Pluto stuff, it's some of the creepiest stuff in that whole sequence in the house, man. Watching, them sit face to face, which is interesting. You never see them face to face. The only people whose faces you see at the same time in the entire movie are Addy and Red's. Yet you're in this room with Jason, and because his counter, Pluto has a mask, you can have them look at each other, be right there. You can have them play this mirror game, and that kind of sets up the end, foreshadows how Jason's going to beat him later on. And again, that's something too that people said, oh, that's why, that's definitely why Jason was swapped, because the tethered have control of the people above. Fair. But at the same time, that does not happen in the movie at all when they're in the same place. When they're existing in the same place, the tethered don't control the above's bodies. And that was scientific experimentation, so it's not 100% accurate, I don't think. I think it's more that Pluto is a kid, and he's seeing himself, and he wants to play. And when, Jason obliges and plays the mirror game with him, later on when Jason, pulls the mask down and plays the mirror game, he's able to get Pluto, and Pluto's just caught up in that. He doesn't realize that he's walking into the back of the fire. But I just love how that whole relationship starts in that closet and then ends with that scene outside in broad daylight, and has Jason beating him. And then last but not least, of course, you have Addy and Red in the house, and that stuff's great because there's so much tension between them. And then when she's like, what do you guys want? And Red, Addy gets up and goes, we want to take our time, and pushes her face into the glass. You're just like, this is terrifying. And then you look at the shot, and in the reflection is the first time you see Addy and Red's face next to each other. Red looking this way and Addy right over top, and it's her reflection in the cracked glass. It's just beautiful. And it's so well executed, man. The tension and everything in that scene, and the way Addy's able to get out, because Jason locks Pluto in the closet. She's like, oh, that's your kid. Run up there. She gets out. But from that point on, like I mentioned earlier, she never loses that chain. She is tethered the whole movie, and I love that symbolism. And then the other scene that just really crushes it for me in this movie, is the finale. The finale is brilliant, specifically the stretch underneath the tunnels, which is, again, one of those things that Jordan Peele flaunts in our face that you don't pick up on. When she goes back to the Hall of Mirrors, you don't even pick up because you're so entranced in, oh my gosh, man, like, Red stole Jason, like, you gotta go get him, that she goes right to the door and knows exactly how to get down into the tunnels. And you're like, not even thinking, like, how would she know how to do that? You don't see her chasing anybody. The only thing you can put together is that she takes off because she sees something, and your brain maybe is saying, oh, okay, she's following whoever, and that's why. But in reality, she just knows where she has to go because that's where she came from. Which also hints at a nice thing. I love watching her go down into the subterranean tunnels, because you see that there's that escalator, which only goes down. The escalator goes down. And it makes sense. It's easy for her to get down because that's the way the escalator goes. But, you kind of wonder, like, how did all the tethered get out? There are blackouts. The lighting goes off throughout the course of the whole movie. Gabe kind of talks about how, like, oh, man, see, like, Josh and them, they got a backup generator. We should have one of those because they lose power. And then, Josh and Kitty's house, they lose power, but, backup generator. But I think when you lose power in the town, I think the escalator stops, which would allow the tethered to go up. So I like that you can kind of piece that together slowly by seeing her enter and see the way that you get down into the subterranean tunnels. But then once she's down there, we get the best cinematic moment of the entire movie. And it again has to do with seeing both of their faces at the same time. There's this shot where, she comes into one of these classrooms after she's walking around all the rabbits, which, by the way, the only thing I haven't been able to understand or pick up on at all in this movie is the white rabbits. I don't, and they're actually not all white. Some of them are black. But I don't get the rabbits at all, other than, like, it's just, I don't know, like a random creepy thing that's just in the movie. Or if that, is part of the food supply because rabbits multiply quite frequently. I have no idea. Rabbits are the only thing I don't understand in this movie. If somebody could tell me what the rabbits mean, I think I might have this movie 100% grasped. But as she's kind of moving down, she finds Addy in a classroom. Addy's standing in front of a chalkboard, and you can see, like, Hands Across America symbols all over the place. And, she's cutting something out, and as she breaks it out, it ends up being, like, the Hands Across America symbol. And then she breaks it down in two and then tears that apart. And it's just all these little things they do that are so nice. But while she's standing there, she starts telling her second story of the movie. And here, Peele puts the camera, what seems like right here, where it's her face, and you can just get the edge of her shoulder. And on the other side of her shoulder is Lupita Nyong'o as Red, standing there, with the fireplace poker, listening to Addy talk. It's the most beautiful shot in the whole movie. The minute it happened, I was just like, wow, like, how did you shoot this shot? It's gorgeous. And it sits there the entire time that she tells the story. It's either on her or it's flashing to, like, when she was, down in the tunnels and, just kind of talking about different elements. When she's talking about things that would flash, the story she tells, it allows to break a couple times. And the conversation in and of itself is great. She kind of talks about how, because she was down in the tunnels, all of a sudden one day she kind of rose to be like a leader or god-like figure, and she was different than all the other tethered, and it's when she started dancing. And what you come to figure out after watching the entire movie is, when Red is up top and not talking and the parents are trying to help, they're like, have her draw, have her write, have her dance. And you find out she takes ballet. Well, while she's doing ballet, down below, Addy starts doing ballet. And when she starts dancing, it clues the tethered into she's different. But what it clues us into after we've watched the movie is, oh my gosh, the line that she delivers right after that is, I would never would have danced if it wasn't for you. Because it wouldn't have. She had no interest in dance, but because of the post-traumatic stress stuff, the tethered, Red, starts dancing, which causes Addy to start dancing down below. It's a cool moment, and when you hear her go like, oh, I would have never started dancing without you, you don't really connect it, and then it connects, boom, again the second time, the third time, even better. And I love that, and the whole buildup of that scene as she's telling the story about how she started to dance and then came up with the plan. She's like, I needed to have a symbol, which we talked about, and going through that whole bit, it just builds this wonderful tension that when it finally breaks and Red takes a shot and runs toward Addy, and we get into this fight sequence. It's the best stuff that Jordan Peele's doing in this movie, man. He cuts up this fight sequence in conjunction with Red dancing on the surface, like on stage, and Addy dancing down in the subterranean tunnels. In conjunction with the fight, as you were seeing Red swing with the fireplace poker and Addy slice her up with the scissors. It's not necessarily a dance sequence, but the way it's shot and syncs that whole scene up musically, like I had said in my non-spoiler, the score in this movie is phenomenal. But they're at the past the do, if you have the soundtrack, that that he kind of cuts in with the 5 on it tethered remix, starts lacing that in as your soundtrack and music, and starts cutting up the fight with these dance sequences where when you cut back the way that Addy is moving with the knife or Red is coming with the poker, it kind of feels like a dance, and you start to watch a legitimate dance battle. You have 2 little girls dancing, cutting back to the 2 adult versions of them fighting. It's absolutely glorious, man. And the whole time you're just like, oh man, where is it gonna go? Where is it gonna go? And when you're watching it the second and the third time, you're starting to root for Addy. You're like, come on, get her. But obviously it all builds, and Red is able to spin and drive it right through Addy's chest. And the one thing I think, because you're like, man, the whole fight, Addy is dominating. Why does Red get the upper hand right at the end when Addy hides, comes out from behind her, and goes to stab her? They talk about the tethered knowing where the counter is. Red herself says that because she knows it. I think she knows that when she goes in, she knows where she is, so she waits, spins, and knocks her off. And then that sequence, man, it was like Heath Ledger level Joker type acting coming from Lupita as she's sitting there dying, because she starts to try to whistle. At the opening scene, young Addy starts whistling in the Hall of Mirrors, and then the counter starts whistling. So now you go to the end, and she's dying. So how am I going to go out with a big old middle finger? And she starts whistling again. But while she's trying to do it, she's like, because she's bleeding. It's like, it reminded me of the way Heath Ledger would move his lips playing the Joker. It's terrifying, which then leads Red to taking the tethered chain around Addy's neck and breaks it. And that, of course, plays into what I was talking about later on with Jason. But holy crud, man. And then when you play that into when they finally get back up and they get into the ambulance and they take off and they have that thriller-esque smile end sequence, the last 20 minutes of this movie are perfect. They're so perfect and just so good. So we have talked at nauseum for this movie, man. We're well over the half-hour mark. If you've hung with me the whole time, I really appreciate it. I don't even think I've hit on everything, but I feel like I got a lot in on what I loved about this movie, what worked, the twists, the turns, the things that Peele's doing in it. There's just so much. I go back, I watch it the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th time. I'll probably keep picking up more and more. And I'm sure, like I said, I may have missed something. So now that I've talked at length for well over a half hour, now it's your turn, man. Hit those comments down below. Like I said, if you know what the rabbits mean, please tell me, because I don't. If I missed anything that you wanted to talk about or was hoping that I would talk about, hit those comments, leave me those things down below. As always, let me know if you like the movie or dislike the movie, what things worked, since this is a spoiler conversation now. Go all in, man. Leave everything in there, all your questions, all your thoughts. Like I said, I've seen this movie a ton of times. Anytime someone's brought something to me or we start talking, I can have a conversation about it. So if there are things you're wondering about, things you disagree with me about, leave all of it down below. Let's start the conversation. As always, if you enjoyed this spoiler-filled review, give me a thumbs up. And if you're new here and you want to come around and hang out with the old C-Man and the Cinema Sit-Down Squad, go hit that subscribe button and then the little bell after so you get alerts every time I make a new video. For the C-Man's Cinema Sit-Down, I'm the C-Man, and I'm signing off. Peace. Well. If you aren't still here, looking for something else to check out that's C-Man related, why don't you check out a video like this guy or this guy? And if you really want to help the C-Man out in year 2, hit that subscribe button and come join the Cinema Sit Down Squad, kids. You know what to do. See ya.